At 7:12 in the morning, a stranger handed me a thick envelope, and just like that, my own parents tried to turn my childhood into an invoice. They did not ask for help. They filed a lawsuit in a state I do not even live in. They called themselves destitute, but I found 5 years of luxury hidden behind one password they forgot I still had. So I did not scream. I built a ledger and waited for the moment that would ruin them in a single sentence. My name is Quinn Reyes, until this morning. I defined my life by the quiet accumulation of security. I do not like surprises, I do not like debt, and I absolutely do not like unannounced visitors. My apartment in Rittenhouse Square is less of a home and more of a fortress I built brick by invisible brick. It is situated on the 14th floor, high enough to reduce the city noise to a hum, with windows that frame the park like a moving painting. I paid for the silence. I paid for the heavy oak floors that do not creak, and the coffee machine that grinds beans with a precise, muffled whir. At 7:15 in the morning, the only sound in my world should have been the hiss of steam from that machine. Instead, the intercom buzzed. It was a sharp, jagged sound that sliced through the gray morning light. I checked the monitor. A man in a beige windbreaker stood in the lobby, looking bored. He did not look like a delivery driver. He carried no boxes, only a flat, thick manila envelope held against his chest. I buzzed him up, not out of curiosity, but because ignoring a problem in the lobby only invites it to your doorstep eventually. By the time he reached my floor, I had placed my coffee cup on the marble island, the ceramic making a hollow thud. I opened the door. The man did not smile. "Quinn Reyes?" he asked. He pronounced my last name wrong, stressing the first syllable instead of the second, a common mistake that usually annoyed me. Today, I did not care. "Yes," I said. He thrust the envelope toward me. "You have been served, ma'am. Have a nice day." He turned and walked toward the elevator before I could even grip the paper properly. The envelope was heavy, warm from his hand, and stamped with the seal of a court I recognized immediately. I closed the door, engaged the deadbolt, and walked back to the kitchen island. The silence of the apartment rushed back in, but the air felt thinner now, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. I slit the envelope open with a paring knife. The paper inside was thick, high-quality bond. Legal documents always smell faintly of toner and dust. I unfolded the complaint, my eyes skipping over the header, the case number, and the venue, landing straight on the names of the plaintiffs, Mark Reyes and Elaine Reyes. My parents. I did not gasp. I did not drop the papers. I felt a cold, metallic taste flood the back of my throat, a physiological reaction I had trained myself to ignore during my years at Northbridge Risk Partners. At Northbridge, when a risk model collapses or a client faces a catastrophic loss, we do not panic. We assess. We quantify. We mitigate. I took a sip of my coffee. It was still hot. I leaned against the counter and began to read, treating the document not as a betrayal, but as a data set. The lawsuit was a masterpiece of creative fiction. The header cited a statute regarding filial responsibility, a dusty medieval concept that most states had abandoned but some, including the one my parents had chosen to file in, still clung to. The narrative constructed in those pages was breathtaking. It painted Mark and Elaine Reyes as destitute, two elderly, frail individuals who had exhausted their life savings to support a family crisis and were now left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a mortgage they could not pay. The crisis in question was explicitly named the divorce of my younger sister, Delaney. According to paragraph 14, the legal fees and emotional support required to extricate Delaney from her marriage had drained their retirement accounts. They claimed they had no liquidity. They claimed they were at risk of becoming wards of the state. But the paragraph that made the room temperature seem to drop 10 degrees was paragraph 22, in legal terms. It argued that I, Quinn Reyes, had entered into a verbal contract with the plaintiffs. It alleged that throughout my childhood and adolescence, I had made promises to care for them in their old age in exchange for the upbringing they provided. They were itemizing my childhood. They were framing the roof over my head, the food on my table, and the clothes on my back not as parental duties, but as a loan I had unknowingly taken out at birth. They were suing me for a return on their investment. They claimed I had equity in my apartment, this apartment, and that I had refused to liquidate it to assist the family collective. Therefore, they were asking the court to order me to pay monthly support totaling $4,500, retroactive for the last 6 months. I set the papers down on the marble. Most daughters would have cried. Most daughters would have reached for their phone and dialed their mother, screaming, asking how they could do this. I looked at my phone, lying face down on the counter. I imagined my mother's voice on the other end. She would be calm. She would say that this was just a formality, that they had to do it for Delaney, that if I just sold the apartment and gave them the money, the lawsuit would vanish. She would weaponize the word family like a shiv. I did not call her. Instead, I walked over to my laptop. I sat down at the dining table, the glass surface cool under my wrists. I opened a new browser window. My parents were people who loved the appearance of success but lacked the discipline to maintain the infrastructure of it. They liked shiny things, country club memberships, and the latest iPhones, but they could not remember a password to save their lives. 5 years ago, during a Thanksgiving visit that felt more like a hostage situation, my father had thrown his iPad onto the sofa in frustration because he could not access his bank statements. "Fix it, Quinn," he had said, waving a hand as if dismissing a waiter. "You are good with computers." I had set up a master password manager for them. I had consolidated their cloud accounts, their banking logins, their investment portfolios, and their email into a single, secure ecosystem. I had written the master password on a piece of cardstock and taped it inside my father's desk drawer. But what they forgot, what they were too arrogant to consider, was that I had set myself up as the recovery administrator. I typed in the URL for the cloud service hosting their digital lives. I entered my father's email address. Then, I paused. If they had changed the password, this would be a short war. But Mark and Elaine Reyes were creatures of habit, and they viewed digital security as a nuisance for poor people. I typed in the password I had created 5 years ago, Reyes family, first. The screen loaded. The progress bar spun for 2 seconds that felt like 2 hours. Then, the dashboard appeared. I was in. I did not look at the photos folder. I had no interest in seeing pictures of Delaney's bridal shower or the vacations they took while I was working 80-hour weeks. I went straight to the file directory. I navigated to the financial subfolders. My father, fastidious about hoarding paper but terrible at organizing it, had AutoSync turned on for everything. Every PDF statement, every tax return, every scanned receipt from his home office scanner was sitting there, waiting for me. I began the download. I pulled their tax returns for the last 5 years. I pulled the monthly statements for their primary checking account, their joint savings, and 3 credit cards. I did not know they had. I pulled the mortgage statements for the house in Bryn Mawr. While the files downloaded, I opened the most recent credit card statement on the screen. Destitute. That was the word they used in the lawsuit filed at 7:12 this morning. I scanned the charges for last month. $400 at a steakhouse in Wayne, $2,000 at a boutique in King of Prussia, $300 for a spa treatment. There were recurring charges for a country club membership they claimed they could no longer afford. I opened the primary checking account. The balance was low. Yes, but the cash flow was enormous. Money came in, and money went out instantly. But it was not going to a divorce lawyer, or at least, not all of it. I saw transfers of $5,000, repeated twice a month, to an entity I did not recognize, but I did not stop to analyze that yet. That was for later. Right now, I was in the acquisition phase. I watched the progress bar on the downloads. 90%, 95%, 100%. I saved everything to an encrypted external drive. Then I saved a backup to my own private, offshore cloud server. Now came the offensive maneuver. I went into the account settings. My parents had filed a lawsuit to compel me to support them. They wanted to drag me into their financial mess. They wanted my attention. They were about to get my undivided, professional attention. I clicked on Change Password. I typed in a new string of characters, 64 digits long. A randomized alphanumeric sequence that no human brain could memorize and no brute force algorithm could crack in a century. I confirmed the change. Then I went to the security settings. I enabled two-factor authentication, but I did not link it to my father's phone number. I linked it to a burner VoIP number I controlled. I went to their email account next. Same process. I changed the password. I changed the recovery email to my own. I logged them out of all active sessions. Somewhere in Bryn Mawr, inside that sprawling, manicured house that smelled of potpourri and denial. A phone might be buzzing with a notification, or perhaps an iPad screen suddenly went black and asked for credentials. My father would try his old password. It would fail. He would try it again, typing harder. As if percussive force could bypass encryption, he would try to reset it, but the verification code would not come to him. It would come to me. He would call my mother. She would scream. They would realize, slowly and with dawn-breaking horror, that the digital lights had just gone out. They could not access their bank statements to hide them. They could not delete the emails they sent to their lawyers. They could not even log into their streaming services to watch a movie to distract themselves. They had locked me into a lawsuit. I had locked them out of the 20th century. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. The adrenaline was settling now, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The destitute narrative was a lie. The lawsuit was a shakedown. But the most painful part, the part I shoved down into the deepest, darkest box in my mind, was the realization that they had planned this. You do not file a lawsuit like this on a whim. They had sat with a lawyer. They had drafted the complaint. They had discussed the strategy of claiming my childhood was a billable service. They had looked at their daughter, the one who never asked for money, the one who built her own life without their help, and they saw a resource to be strip-mined. I looked around my apartment. The morning sun was finally breaking through the clouds, casting a pale, geometric stripe across the floor. This place was 45% of my net worth. It was the physical manifestation of every latte I did not buy, every vacation I did not take, and every bonus I invested while my peers bought Teslas. They wanted me to sell it. They wanted to liquidate my safety to fund Delaney's mistakes and their own delusions of grandeur. I stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the tiny figures moving through Rittenhouse Square. They looked like ants from up here. My parents had just fired a cannonball at my front door. They expected me to come out waving a white flag, checkbook in hand, desperate for their approval, desperate to be the good daughter again. They expected Quinn the peacemaker, Quinn the quiet one. They had no idea who I had become. I was not their daughter anymore. I was an adversary, and I held the keys to the kingdom they had forgotten they didn't own. I turned back to the laptop, the screen glowing with the confirmation message. Password changed successfully. The war had started at 7:15. By 8 o'clock, I had already won the first battle. I picked up my phone, not to call them, but to verify that the notifications were routed correctly. Silence. Perfect. Controlling silence. I took the last sip of my coffee. It was lukewarm, but it tasted like victory. I was ready to see exactly what they were hiding. The silence in my apartment did not last long. My phone began to vibrate against the marble countertop, a low, persistent hum that sounded like a wasp trapped under a glass. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was. The digital lockout had taken effect. The shock of the lawsuit had worn off for them, replaced by the panic of losing control. I picked up the phone. 47 notifications. They were not asking why I had changed the passwords. They were not asking if I was okay. The messages were a chaotic mix of guilt, rage, and performative martyrdom. After everything we sacrificed for you, my mother wrote, you are stealing our memories, my father added, referring to the cloud account he had not looked at in 3 years. This is elder abuse, came a text from a number I did not recognize, likely one of their friends they had spun a sob story to. I scrolled through the wall of text, feeling a familiar, dull ache in my chest. It was the ache of being the glass child. In clinical terms, the glass child is the sibling of a high-needs child, the one who is looked through, expected to be transparent, problem-free, and self-sustaining. Delaney was not high needs in the medical sense. But she was high needs in the vanity sense. She was the golden child, the investment, the asset my parents believed would pay the highest dividends if packaged correctly. I closed my eyes and the memories hit me, not soft and nostalgic, but sharp and expensive. I remembered being 16 years old. I was sitting at the kitchen table, studying for the SATs with a prep book I had bought from a used bookstore for $5. Across the room, my mother was on the phone, booking a flight for Delaney. Delaney was 14. She needed to go to a tennis camp in Hilton Head, not because she had any aptitude for tennis, but because, as my mother put it, that was where the right kind of families sent their daughters. The cost of that 2-week camp was $4,000. I remembered asking for a tutor for AP Calculus. It would have cost $50 an hour. My father had sighed, looking over the top of his reading glasses, and told me that things were tight right now and that I was smart enough to figure it out myself. I was the smart one. Delaney was the pretty one. That was the division of labor in the Reyes household. Being smart was free. Being pretty was a capital-intensive business. They treated Delaney like a startup company. They invested in her branding. There were etiquette classes, not the old-fashioned kind with books on heads, but modern personal branding workshops. There were trips to Europe during the summer, explicitly designed to create a cosmopolitan aura for her Instagram feed. There was the deviated septum surgery when she was 18, which remarkably resulted in a perfect, slope-nosed profile. They were building a product designed to marry well, to ascend into a social stratum that Mark and Elaine Reyes could only touch by proxy. And I was the back office. I was the operational support. When I got a full scholarship to college, they did not throw a party. They breathed a sigh of relief because it freed up capital for Delaney's out-of-state tuition at a party school where she majored in communications and minored in sorority dues. When I graduated and got a job at Northbridge Risk Partners, they nodded and asked if I could look over their mortgage refinance paperwork. They praised me for being low maintenance. They told their friends I was so independent. They did not see that my independence was a survival mechanism. I learned early on that if I had a need, it was an inconvenience. If I had a crisis, it was a distraction from the main event, which was always Delaney. I looked around my apartment again. They called it our asset in their lawsuit. They felt entitled to it because they believed their sacrifice of raising me gave them equity in my adulthood. They had no idea what this apartment actually cost me. It was not bought with family money. It was bought with 4 years of aggressive, suffocating frugality. While Delaney was posting photos of her bachelorette party in Cabo San Lucas, I was eating oatmeal for dinner 5 nights a week. While my parents were leasing a new Mercedes every 3 years to keep up appearances at the club, I was walking 2 miles to work to save on subway fare. I did not buy new clothes for 24 months. I picked up extra consulting shifts on weekends. I missed weddings. I missed birthdays. I lived like a monk in the middle of a city designed for excess. I built this fortress dollar by dollar, depriving myself of every small joy so that I could have one big, unassailable security. And now, they wanted to liquidate it because Delaney's husband had filed for divorce and cut off her credit cards. The phone buzzed again. "We are your parents. Quinn, you owe us this. Don't make us come down there." I stared at the screen. They were trying to command me. They were using the old trigger's duty, honor, shame that had worked when I was 12, but I was not 12. I was 34, and I managed risk for a living. I knew I could not ignore them forever. The lawsuit was real. The digital lockout was a temporary tactical advantage, but it would not stop the legal process. I needed more information. I needed to see exactly how desperate they were. In my line of work, you never rely on the data provided by the counterparty. You go to the site, you inspect the physical assets. I grabbed my keys. I was not going to call them. I was going to Bryn Mawr. The drive from Center City to the main line takes about 40 minutes if the traffic on the Schuylkill Expressway is forgiving. Today, the highway was a gray ribbon of sludge, but I drove with mechanical precision. I rehearsed the conversation in my head, stripping away the emotion, focusing on the facts. I exited the highway and turned onto the winding, tree-lined roads of the suburbs. This was old money territory, stone walls covered in ivy, driveways that vanished into wooded estates, cars that cost more than the average American home. My parents lived in a development that tried very hard to look like an estate. The house was a sprawling mock Tudor construction, too big for the lot it sat on, pushing right up against the setbacks. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw the perfect, emerald green lawn. It was chemically enhanced, flawless, and expensive to maintain. There was no for sale sign. There was no sign of deferred maintenance. The gutters were clean. The landscaping was manicured. This did not look like the home of a destitute couple. It looked like the home of people who would burn their furniture for warmth before they let the neighbors see them wearing a sweater. I parked my 10-year-old sedan behind my father's Range Rover. The contrast was a visual punchline. The thrifty daughter in the sensible car, coming to bail out the parents in the luxury SUV. I walked to the front door. I did not knock. I still had my key, a heavy brass thing that felt cold in my palm. I unlocked the door and stepped into the foyer. The smell hit me first. It was the scent of my childhood expensive vanilla candles, furniture polish, and a faint, underlying note of anxiety. Quinn, my mother's voice floated from the living room. It was not the voice of a woman who had just sued her daughter. It was the voice of a hostess greeting a guest who was slightly late. I walked into the living room. It was a tableau of dysfunction arranged like a magazine spread. My father, Mark, stood by the wet bar. He was wearing a cashmere sweater and holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. It was 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. He swirled the amber liquid with the casual arrogance of a man who believes the world owes him a dividend. He looked up at me, his face flushing slightly, not with shame, but with indignation. My mother, Elaine, sat on the white linen sofa. She was dressed in stiff, structured clothes, her hair perfectly coiffed. She had the tight, brittle smile of a woman who believes that if she pretends everything is fine, the universe will eventually agree with her. And then there was Delaney. My sister was curled up in the oversized armchair, her legs tucked under her. She was 31 years old, but she looked like a teenager playing the role of a tragic heroine. She was wearing designer loungewear that probably cost $600. She was crying, but it was a controlled, aesthetic crying. Her tears were clear tracks down her cheeks. Her mascara was intact. It was waterproof. Of course, even in the middle of a divorce and a family implosion, Delaney had the presence of mind to apply waterproof makeup. She looked up at me, her eyes wide and wet. Quinn, she choked out. She held a tissue in one hand and her iPhone in the other. Her thumb was hovering over the screen. Even now, even while she was allegedly devastated, she was checking her engagement metrics. She was worried about the optics of her divorce, not the financial ruin it was causing. "You changed the passwords," my father said. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. He took a sip of his scotch. That was very childish. "Quinn, we have bills to pay. We need access to those accounts." I stood in the archway, keeping my distance. I did not sit down. Sitting down implies you are staying. Sitting down implies you are part of the family meeting. I was not family today. I was the opposition. "You sued me." I said. My voice was calm, lower than theirs. "You sent a process server to my building at 7 in the morning. My mother waved her hand dismissively, as if I were complaining about the weather. "Oh, Quinn, don't be dramatic. It's just a legal maneuver. The lawyer said it was the fastest way to restructure the assets. We didn't want to do it, but you were being so stubborn about the apartment. Restructure the assets." As if my life savings were just a line item in their portfolio that had been misallocated. "We are destitute," my father said, echoing the lawsuit. He gestured around the room, which was filled with silk drapes and Persian rugs. "Look at this. We are barely holding on. Delaney's lawyer needs a retainer of $25,000 by Friday, or she gets crushed in the settlement. He needs $25,000. Delaney sniffed, wiping her nose delicately. "He is the best in the city. If I don't have him, Todd is going to take everything. He's going to say I cheated. Did you?" I asked. The room went silent. The air pressure dropped. My mother stood up, her face tightening. "That is not the point. The point is that we are a family, and in this family, we help each other. We invested everything in you girls. We gave you everything. And now, when we need a little help, when your sister's life is falling apart, you are hoarding money in that apartment like a miser. She walked toward me, the smell of her expensive perfume becoming suffocating. We need liquidity. Quinn, your father's liquidity is tied up in markets. We just need you to liquidate the apartment. You can move back here for a while. Your old room is ready. It will be nice, just like old times. I looked at her. I looked at the perfectly decorated room that smelled of debt. I looked at Delaney, who was refreshing her feet again. They wanted me to sell my freedom to fund their facade. They wanted me to move back into the room where I had studied in the dark to escape them. They wanted to consume me to keep the lights on for one more month of this charade. I looked at my father. He poured himself another drink. The bottle was a single malt, aged 18 years. It cost at least $150. You are not destitute, I said. You are over-leveraged. My father slammed the glass down. It cracked. A sharp sound that made Delaney jump. Watch your tone, he snapped. I raised you. I made you. You think you are so smart with your little risk analysis job? You don't know the first thing about the real world. You don't know what it takes to maintain a legacy. I looked at him. Really looked at him. I saw the tremor in his hand. I saw the sweat on his upper lip. This wasn't just about Delaney's divorce. A divorce lawyer costs money. Yes, but not sue your daughter for her home money. Not immediately. There was something else. The smell of living beyond means was masking a rot that was much deeper than credit card debt. I am not selling, I said. Delaney let out a wail that sounded practiced. Mom. Make her. My mother's face shifted. The hostess mask fell away, revealing something cold and ugly underneath. If you don't help us, Quinn, you are no daughter of mine. We will pursue this lawsuit. We will garnish your wages. We will humiliate you in front of your boss. Do you think Northbridge wants a VP who gets sued by her own elderly parents for abandonment? It was a threat, a calculated, direct threat to my career. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was the calm of the auditor who has finally found the discrepancy in the ledger. I had come here to scout, and I had seen enough. I realized then that the glass child was no longer transparent. I had become a mirror, reflecting their own failures back at them, and they hated me for it. I turned around. Where are you going? My father shouted. I haven't dismissed you. I walked back to the front door. I stepped out into the fresh air, leaving the scent of vanilla and desperation behind me. I walked to my car, got in, and locked the doors. As I backed out of the driveway, I looked at the house one last time. It looked perfect, but I knew that inside, the termites were swarming, and I wasn't going to be the wood they fed on. I drove away, my hands steady on the wheel. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I started calculating the next move. If they wanted a war about money, I would give them a masterclass in forensic accounting. They thought they were fighting a daughter. They were about to find out they were fighting a creditor. I paused with my hand on the cold brass of the doorknob. My father's shout had not frightened me, but it had triggered a professional curiosity. In my line of work, when a counterparty becomes hostile, it is usually because they have played their ace card and it failed to clear the table. I wanted to see exactly what cards they had left. I wanted the terms of this extortion explicitly stated on the record. I turned back to face the room. The air was thick with the scent of expensive bourbon and entitlement. My mother, Elaine, smoothed the fabric of her skirt. She misinterpreted my hesitation as submission. She thought her threat about my career had landed. She patted the cushion next to her, a gesture that was meant to be welcoming but looked more like a spider checking the tension of its web. Come sit. Quinn, she said, her voice dropping an octave to a tone she likely considered reasonable. Let us not be dramatic. We are just looking at the numbers. We did some research on your building in Rittenhouse. The market is very hot right now. You have significant equity. She used the word equity with a proprietary casualness, as if my mortgage payments were a family savings account she had access to. It is a simple calculation. She continued. You sell the unit, you realize the gains, you transfer the liquidity to the family trust to cover the legal retainer and the overhead for the next 18 months. We call it a temporary asset reallocation. Once Delaney settles, we pay you back. Temporary asset reallocation. It was a phrase so sterile, so devoid of the reality that she was asking me to make myself homeless, that I almost laughed. My father, Mark, chimed in, leaning against the mantel. He had regained his composure and slipped fully into his boardroom persona. He treated this family crisis like a quarterly earnings call, where the numbers were down, and he needed to spin a narrative for the shareholders. Quinn, you have to understand the macro view here, he said, gesturing with his glass. We are facing a liquidity crunch. It is a timing issue. My capital is tied up in long-term positions that I cannot exit without taking a tax hit. It would be poor strategy to liquidate my portfolio now. He took a sip of his drink. Furthermore, we have to think about brand protection. The Reyes name means something in this town. If Delaney goes into this divorce with a court-appointed lawyer or some strip mall attorney, she looks weak. If she looks weak, Todd crushes her. We need the best representation to signal strength. It is an investment in the outcome. I looked at Delaney. She was nodding vigorously, her eyes wide. Todd is ruthless. Quinn, she said. Her voice was high and thin. He has a forensic accountant. He is trying to say I spent too much. He wants to leave me with nothing. I need the dream team. I need the firm that represented the senator's wife. Their retainer is $50,000 just to open the file. $50,000. That was more than I spent on food in 3 years. And it is not just the lawyer, Delaney added, her voice gaining speed. I have appearances to maintain. If I stop going to the charity galas, if I drive an old car, people will talk. They will say Todd won. I cannot let him win the narrative. I stood there, listening to them construct a reality where my apartment was the only variable that could be changed. They spoke of strategy and narrative and brand, words that cost nothing to say but everything to maintain. They were asking me to burn down my shelter to keep their stage lights on. I took a step forward, moving out of the foyer and back into the living room. I did not sit. I have a question. I said. My voice was level, cutting through their frantic energy like a scalpel. They all looked at me, expectant. They thought I was going to ask about the repayment schedule or the interest rate. If you are so desperate for liquidity, I said, looking directly at my father, why is the Range Rover still in the driveway? The room went dead silent. The grandfather clock in the hall ticked loudly, marking the seconds of their shock. I turned to my mother. Why are you still a member of the Marion Cricket Club? The annual dues are $15,000. Why are you wearing a Cartier tank watch that is resaleable for at least $4,000? I turned to Delaney. Why haven't you sold your Birkin bags? You have 3. That is $30,000 right there. I looked back at my father. You are drinking a $150 bottle of scotch while asking me to sell my home. Why? For a moment, nobody moved. It was the forbidden question. In the Reyes family, you could discuss problems, but you could never suggest that the solution involved lowering our standard of living. That was heresy. My father's face turned a deep, blotchy red. That is preposterous, he sputtered. We cannot sell the cars. We need reliable transportation. You need a car. I corrected him. You do not need an $80,000 SUV. You do not understand. My mother hissed, standing up. Her mask of reasonableness had vanished completely. We have a position to uphold. We cannot be seen selling off our personal effects like paupers. It would send the wrong message. The wrong message to whom I asked. To the strangers you are trying to impress. You would rather evict your daughter than be seen driving a Honda. My mother took 2 steps toward me. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. You are being incredibly selfish. Quinn, she spat the word out. Selfish. We raised you, she continued, her voice rising to a shriek. We paid for your braces. We paid for your piano lessons. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. You walked around here, eating our food, using our electricity, taking. And now you have a little bit of success. and you think it belongs to you." She poked a finger at my chest. "You are an investment that we made, and it is time for you to pay out. You owe us. That apartment is not yours. It is ours. It is the family's reserve capital, and we are calling it in." There it was, the naked truth. They did not view me as a person. They viewed me as a savings bond that had finally matured. The filial responsibility lawsuit was not a desperate legal maneuver. It was an attempt to collect on an invoice they had been keeping in their heads since the day I was born. I looked at them. I looked at my father, who was nodding in agreement with my mother's tirade. I looked at Delaney, who looked annoyed that I was making this difficult. They were not asking for help. This was a robbery. I felt a sudden, profound shift inside me. The last tether of guilt. The thin wire that connects a child to their parents no matter how toxic they are, snapped. It made no sound, but I felt the recoil. I realized I was not negotiating. You cannot negotiate with terrorists, and you cannot negotiate with narcissists. They do not want a compromise. They want total submission. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt stale, recycled. "I am not selling," I said. I did not shout. I did not offer excuses. I did not say, "I can't." I said, "I won't." My mother's mouth fell open. My father stepped forward, his face contorted with rage. "Then you are finished," he roared. "If you walk out that door without agreeing to the sale, you are no longer part of this family. We will pursue this lawsuit until you are bankrupt. We will drag your name through the mud. We will tell everyone what an ungrateful, cold-hearted, wretched girl you are." "Do it," I said. I turned my back on them. Quinn Delaney screamed, "Do not walk away from us." My father was shouting something about legal fees and court orders. My mother was crying, a loud, ugly sound meant to hook me and pull me back. I walked to the front door. My hand found the cool brass knob again. I opened the door. The afternoon light spilled into the gloomy foyer. I stepped out onto the porch. I did not slam the door. Slams are for people who want a reaction. Slams are for people who want you to chase them. I closed the door gently. I turned the handle until the latch clicked into place with a soft, final metallic sound. That click was louder than any scream. It was the sound of a vault locking. It was the sound of a bridge burning. I walked to my car, the silence of the driveway wrapping around me. I had my answer. I had my data. They wanted a war. They had just declared it on the one person who knew exactly where they buried the bodies. The morning after I walked out of my parents' house, I did not go to work. I called in sick for the first time in 7 years. I had a different kind of work to do. At 9 o'clock sharp, I walked into the office of Miles Kerrigan. Miles was a referral from the general counsel at Northbridge. He was not a warm man. He did not have pictures of a golden retriever on his desk, and he did not offer me water. He was 45, wore a suit that cost more than my first car, and had eyes that looked like they had seen every variety of human greed and found it boring. He was exactly what I needed. I did not want a handholder. I wanted a weapon. I sat down and slid the thick manila envelope across his glass desk. "They are suing for support under the Indigent Parent Statute," I said. "They claim they are destitute. They claim I entered a verbal contract as a minor to repay my upbringing." Miles opened the file. He read the first page, flipped to the financial affidavit, and then closed the folder. The whole process took him less than 90 seconds. "This is garbage," he said. His voice was dry, devoid of inflection. "The venue is wrong. They filed in Pennsylvania because that is where they live, but you reside in Philadelphia County, and the alleged contract breach occurred here. We will file a motion to dismiss based on improper venue. Then we will file a motion to dismiss for failure to state a claim upon which relief can be granted. The verbal contract argument is weak. The statute of frauds will eat that alive." He looked at me. "But you know that already. You did not hire me to tell you the law is on your side. You hired me because you know they are not going to stop with a dismissal." He was right. My parents were not acting rationally. They were acting out of desperation. If we got the case thrown out on a technicality, they would just refile. They would harass me. They would come to my office. "I need to kill this. Miles," I said, "I need to make the cost of pursuing me higher than the potential payout." Miles nodded once. "Then we go on the offensive. We demand full discovery. If they claim they are destitute, the court is entitled to see every penny they have spent in the last 5 years. We will ask for tax returns, bank statements, credit card bills, and loan applications. We will turn their financial life inside out." I smiled. A thin, cold expression. "I already have the head start." I said, "I left his office with a retainer agreement signed and a strategy in place. Miles would handle the legal shielding. I would handle the ammunition." By 10:30, I was back in my apartment. I had converted my dining table into a war room. The morning sun was harsh, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, but I did not close the blinds. I needed the light. I took the encrypted drive I had downloaded from my parents' cloud account and plugged it into my laptop. I had also printed out 2 reams of paper bank statements, credit card bills, and tax returns for the last 5 years. I spread them out physically. There is something about seeing the data on paper, physically highlighting the lines with a yellow marker, that reveals patterns a screen can hide. I started with the destitute claim. My parents were not poor, they were simply insolvent, which is a very different thing. Poor is having no money. Insolvent is having a massive amount of money flowing through your hands, but spending 10% more than you make every single month. I traced the lease payments on the Range Rover, $1,200 a month. I traced the club dues, $1,300 a month. I found a recurring charge for a storage unit in King of Prussia that cost $400 a month. I wondered what was in there. Probably furniture they bought and got bored of. They were living a life designed for an income of $500,000 a year. But their actual income, now that my father was semi-retired, was closer to $150,000. They were bridging the gap with credit cards and home equity lines of credit. They were drowning. Yes, but they were drowning in champagne. But then I found the anomaly. I was looking at the primary checking account statements from 18 months ago. Up until that point, the spending was predictable: restaurants, clothes, cars. But starting in February of last year, a new pattern emerged. On the 15th of every month, there was a transfer of $5,000. The recipient was listed simply as D. Reyes Strategies, LLC. I paused. My highlighter hovered over the paper. Delaney. My sister had never had a job that required a W-2 form, let alone a limited liability company. She had a degree in communications that she used to write captions for her selfies. She did not have a strategy. She did not have clients. I searched the Pennsylvania Corporate Registry database. D. Reyes Strategies, LLC was registered 18 months ago. The registered agent was a generic filing service in Harrisburg. The principal address was a P.O. box in Bryn Mawr. Why would my parents be paying my sister $5,000 a month under the guise of a business transaction? If it was an allowance, they would just transfer it to her personal account. They had done that for years. Why create a corporate shell? I dug deeper. I pulled up the tax returns. My father had listed these payments as consulting fees on his own Schedule C for a small consulting business he ran on the side. He was writing off the money he gave to Delaney as a business expense to lower his own taxes. That was tax fraud, plain and simple. But it was petty tax fraud. It was the kind of thing the IRS might slap your wrist for. It did not explain the sheer scale of the panic I had seen in their living room. $5,000 a month was a lot. But it was not sue your daughter money. I kept looking. I felt like a shark smelling blood in the water. I needed to know where the money for these transfers was coming from. Their income didn't support it. Then I saw it. The influx. Every time the checking account got low, there was a transfer in from an external account titled N.R. Trust. My stomach dropped. The cold, metallic taste returned to my mouth. Bitter and sharp. Nana Rose, my maternal grandmother, Rose, had died 6 years ago. She was a woman of steel and grace, the only person in my family who had ever looked at me and seen something other than a utility. She had left a modest fortune, specifically designated in a trust for her grandchildren's education. It was meant for the next generation, for my future children. for Delaney's future children, and for our cousin's kids. My mother was the trustee. The trust had strict bylaws. The money could only be used for educational expenses, medical emergencies, or the purchase of a primary residence for a beneficiary. I pulled the statements for the N.R. Trust. I had to hack into a separate subfolder to find them. One my father had buried deep in a folder labeled Old Tax Docs. I opened the PDF. My hand was shaking slightly. 2 years ago, the trust had a balance of $450,000. Today, the balance was $12,000. I stared at the number. $438,000. Gone. I looked at the withdrawals. They were not for tuition. They were not for down payments. Transfer to checking $20,000. Transfer to checking $15,000. Transfer to checking $50,000. My mother had been looting her own mother's legacy. She had drained the education fund meant for her grandchildren to pay for her own lifestyle and to fund D. Reyes Strategies, LLC. I felt a surge of nausea. This was not just bad money management. This was embezzlement. This was a breach of fiduciary duty. If my cousins found out, if the other beneficiaries found out, my mother would not just be sued. She could go to prison. But where did the money go after it hit Delaney's shell company? I did not have access to Delaney's business bank account, but I did have my parents' credit card statements, and I noticed something odd. There were payments to a firm called Sterling Hearth. I Googled them. They were not divorce lawyers. They were a boutique crisis management and reputation defense firm. And there were payments to a forensic data recovery service. I started to build a flowchart on a blank sheet of paper. Source: Nana Rose's trust theft. Conduit: parents' checking account. Laundering mechanism: D. Reyes Strategies, LLC. Fake consulting fees. End-use crisis PR. Data recovery, and legal retainers. This was not about a divorce. You do not hire a crisis management firm because you are getting divorced, unless you are a celebrity or unless you have done something that could ruin you publicly. I looked at the dates. The heavy withdrawals from the trust started 3 months before Delaney's husband filed for divorce. The narrative my parents told, that the divorce caused the financial crisis, was a lie. The crisis existed before the divorce. The money was being hemorrhaged to cover up something else. Something Delaney did, and the divorce was likely the result of whatever that thing was. I sat back, looking at the 30-page report I had just compiled. It was a dossier of destruction. I had graphs showing the drain of the trust fund. I had a timeline correlating the transfers to the creation of the shell company. I had highlighted the tax fraud where my father claimed Delaney was a consultant. I realized then why they were so terrified. I realized why they had sued me. They needed my money to refill the trust fund before the annual audit. Or perhaps my cousins were starting to ask questions about the trust. And my mother needed to show a balance that wasn't zero. They were not asking me to support them in their old age. They were trying to use my life savings to plug a hole in a crime scene. They were trying to make me an accessory after the fact to the theft of my grandmother's legacy. I looked at the stack of papers. It was heavy, dense with numbers that screamed betrayal. I picked up my phone and took a picture of the flowchart. I sent it to Miles with a caption I found the motive. It is not poverty, it is grand larceny. Then I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was high over Rittenhouse Square now. The city looked clean and bright. But inside my apartment, the air felt heavy. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about how she used to slip me $20 when I got an A on my report card, telling me to put it in my freedom fund. She knew. She knew what they were like, and she had tried to protect the future from them, and they had stolen it. They thought they could intimidate me with a lawsuit. They thought they could shame me into submission. They had no idea. They had handed me the murder weapon, and they had forgotten to wipe off their fingerprints. This was no longer a family dispute. I was not just a daughter defending her apartment anymore. I was the auditor, and the audit was closed. I packed the papers into a neat stack. I felt a cold, hard resolve settle in my chest, displacing the anger. I was going to destroy them, not because I hated them, but because the numbers did not lie. And the numbers said they were guilty. The phone on my desk at Northbridge Risk Partners rang at 2:14 in the afternoon. It was my personal cell, not my work line. I had been staring at a spreadsheet of actuarial tables for 20 minutes without actually seeing the numbers. My mind was still stuck on the flowchart I had created the day before, the one that mapped the theft of my grandmother's trust fund. I picked up the phone. It was Miles Kerrigan. "Quinn, are you in a place where you can talk freely?" he asked. His voice was devoid of pleasantries. It had the tight, clipped quality of a lawyer who has just turned over a rock and found something venomous underneath. I closed my office door and engaged the privacy lock. "I am secure," I said. "What is it?" "Did they file a motion? No." Miles said, "This is not about your parents filing. This is about the divorce." I frowned. "I told you, I am not a party to Delaney's divorce." "You are now," he said. "Or at least, your financial ecosystem is adjacent to it. Listen to me carefully. I have a contact at the firm representing Todd, your sister's husband. It is a small legal world in Philadelphia. We went to law school together. We traded some notes, strictly off the record, strictly professional courtesy." I waited. My heart began to beat a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Todd is not just divorcing Delaney for irreconcilable differences. Miles continued. That is the public filing. That is the vanilla version they feed to the press. But the settlement negotiations are aggressive because there is a conduct clause involved, a criminal conduct clause. I gripped the edge of my desk. "Criminal Todd is a senior partner at a merger and acquisition firm," Miles said. "Apparently, about 8 months ago, some proprietary data regarding a pending acquisition was leaked. It did not hit the news, but it hit the market. There were suspicious trades. The SEC started sniffing around. Todd's firm did an internal audit. They traced the leak to a home computer." He paused, letting the silence gain weight. "Delaney's iPad. Quinn, your sister didn't just overhear pillow talk. She took photos of documents Todd left in his home office, and she sent them to someone." I felt the blood drain from my face. My sister, whose greatest intellectual achievement prior to this was curating a Pinterest board for her wedding, was involved in corporate espionage. To whom I whispered, "To whom did she send them? We don't know yet," Miles said. "But Todd's lawyers are terrifying. They are offering her a choice. She walks away with nothing, no alimony, no settlement, zero, and signs an NDA, and they bury the internal investigation, or they hand the evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice." I closed my eyes. The puzzle pieces from the night before slammed into place with the force of a wrecking ball. The D, Reyes Strategies LLC, the payments to the crisis management firm. The sudden, desperate need for liquidity. They are not paying for a divorce lawyer, I said, my voice sounding hollow in the small room. They are paying hush money. "Exactly," Miles said. "That shell company you found, I would bet my license that it is being used to funnel money to whoever helped her execute the trade, or whoever is blackmailing her about it, and the retainer for her defense team. It is not to get her a better settlement. It is to keep her out of federal prison." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My parents were not destitute because of bad luck. They were broke because they were financing a cover-up for a felony. They were draining their retirement and my grandmother's trust to plug a dam that was about to burst, and now they wanted my apartment. They need your money to pay off the blackmailer or to replenish the funds they stole before the auditors notice, Miles said. They are desperate, Quinn, and desperate people are dangerous. They are not suing you for support. They are suing you for a lifeline. I hung up the phone. I felt sick. Not the butterflies in the stomach kind of sick, but a deep, visceral nausea that comes from realizing you share DNA with people who have no moral floor. But the call with Miles had triggered a new, darker suspicion. If they were willing to steal from a dead woman's trust fund, and if they were willing to engage in insider trading, where did the line stop? They viewed me as a resource. A resource is not something you respect. It is something you use. I opened my laptop. I did not go back to the bank statements I had downloaded. I went to the credit bureaus. I had frozen my credit years ago as a general precaution. But I had unthawed it recently when I applied for a new travel rewards card. I had forgotten to freeze it back. I logged into Equifax first. I scanned the open accounts section. Mortgage mine, car lease mine, credit cards mine. Then I saw it. A personal business loan, originating 6 months ago. The lender was a second-tier bank in Delaware, the kind that advertises easy approval and asks few questions. The principal amount was $75,000. The borrower was listed as Mark Reyes, but in the associated names column, there was another entry, Guarantor Quinn Reyes. I stared at the screen. The room seemed to tilt. I had never signed for a loan for my father. I had never spoken to a bank in Delaware. I clicked on the details. The loan was currently 60 days past due. It was in pre-default status. I did not scream. I did not cry. I went into what I call zero state. It is a mental space where emotions are turned off, and only logic exists. It is the state in which you survive a crash. I picked up the phone and dialed the bank in Delaware. I navigated the automated menu with aggressive speed. When a human finally answered, a woman named Brenda with a tired voice, I cut straight to the point. My name is Quinn Reyes. I am looking at a loan on my credit report that I did not authorize. The loan number is 88429. One moment, ma'am, Brenda said. Let me pull that up. I waited. The hold music was a tinny, distorted jazz loop. Okay, I see it here, Brenda said. A loan for $75,000. Borrower Mark Reyes. You are listed as the co-signer and guarantor. I did not sign that, I said. My voice was ice. Well, ma'am, we have a signature on file. It was executed via DocuSign, but we also have a wet signature scan of the guarantor agreement uploaded to the portal. Send it to me, I said. Now, I have to verify some security questions first. She said, verify them. I said, we went through the dance. Mother's maiden name, first pet, high school mascot. My parents knew all of these answers. Of course they did. They were the ones who gave me the pet and sent me to the high school. They had used my security questions to bypass the identity check. I am emailing you the document now, Brenda said. I refreshed my inbox. The PDF appeared. I opened it. There, on the bottom line, was my name. Quinn Reyes. The handwriting was a good attempt. The slant was right. The capital Q was looped the way I used to loop it in college. But the R was wrong. I crossed my R at the top. This R was crossed at the bottom. It was my mother's handwriting. I had seen that R 1,000 times on birthday cards and permission slips. Elaine Reyes had forged my signature to secure a $75,000 loan because my father's credit was shot. And they needed more money to feed the beast. And the loan was in default. If they did not pay, the bank would come for me. They would garnish my wages. They would put a lien on my apartment, my credit score, which I had polished like a diamond to a perfect 850, would be shattered. They had not just sued me, they had identity thefted me. They had wrapped a rope around my ankle and tied the other end to their sinking ship. If they went down, they were determined to drag me down to the bottom of the ocean with them. I looked at the date on the document. 6 months ago. This was before the lawsuit. This was before the destitute claim. This was premeditated. They knew they were in trouble, and they decided that my financial health was a fair price to pay for their survival. I felt a cold rage settle in my chest. It was heavier than the anger I had felt yesterday. I was mad that they wanted my money. Today, I realized they were trying to kill my future. I spoke into the phone. Brenda was still on the line. Brenda, I said, you need to flag this account for fraud immediately. Ma'am, if this is a family dispute, she began. This is not a dispute, I interrupted. This is a felony. I am filing a police report within the hour. I am sending you a sworn affidavit of forgery. If you attempt to collect 1 cent from me, I will sue your bank for negligence in identity verification. Do you understand? There was a silence on the line. Yes, ma'am, Brenda whispered. I will mark it as disputed fraud. I hung up. I immediately dialed the 3 major credit bureaus. I placed a total freeze on my reports. No one, not me, not my parents, not the Pope could open a new account in my name. Then I printed the forged document. I put it in a new folder on my desk. I labeled it Exhibit B. I sat there for a moment, the silence of the office pressing in on me. I thought about the dinner parties my parents used to throw. I thought about how my father would toast to integrity and family values. I thought about how my mother would critique my posture and tell me that presentation was everything. It was all a lie. They were grifters. They were criminals in country club clothing. They thought I was the weak link. They thought I was the glass child who would shatter under pressure. They thought that by suing me, they would scare me into silence, and I would never look close enough to find the loan. They were wrong. I picked up my cell phone and called Miles back. "Quinn," he answered. "You sound different." "I am different." I said, "I have an update." "Go ahead." "I found a loan." I said, $75,000. Defaulting. My name is on it as guarantor. "Okay," Miles said, his voice sharpening. "Did you sign it?" "No." I said, "Elaine did. I have the PDF. It is a forgery." Miles let out a low whistle. "That changes the complexion of the game. Quinn, that is bank fraud. That is identity theft. That carries mandatory prison time." "I know." I said, "What do you want to do?" he asked. "We can use this as leverage to get them to drop the lawsuit. We can tell them that if they withdraw the case, we won't go to the police." I looked at the forged signature on my screen. I looked at the loop on the cue that was almost right, but not quite. It was the loop of a mother who thought she owned her daughter. "No," I said. "No," Miles asked. "We do not offer a deal." I said, "We let them proceed. We let them walk into that deposition room. We let them swear under oath that they are honest, destitute people. We let them dig the hole until they can't see the sky. And then, I said, I pushed them in. I hung up the phone. I felt a strange sense of liberation. For 34 years, I had been trying to figure out how to be the daughter they wanted. I had tried to be good. I had tried to be invisible. I had tried to be successful. Now, I knew my role. I was not the daughter. I was the witness for the prosecution. In risk management, we call it a honeypot. It is a decoy system, designed to look vulnerable and attractive to an attacker, enticing them to enter so we can observe their methods and trace their origin. My parents and Delaney thought they were the predators. They thought they had cornered me with a lawsuit and a guilt trip. It was time to let them believe they were right. I waited 3 days after discovering the forged loan document before making contact. I needed them to sweat. I needed their desperation to curdle into impatience. When I finally instructed Miles to reach out to their attorney, I told him to change his tone. No more aggressive dismissal motions. No more jurisdictional challenges. "Tell them I am tired," I said to Miles. "Tell them the stress is affecting my work. Tell them I am willing to discuss a settlement. But I need to understand the full scope of the financial liability before I liquidate any assets." Miles had paused on the other end of the line. "You want to give them hope?" he asked. "I want to give them a shovel," I replied. The reaction was immediate. Within 2 hours, my mother sent me a text message. It was devoid of the venom she had displayed in her living room. "I am so glad you are coming to your senses. Quinn, we are a family. We knew you would do the right thing." I did not reply with emotion. I replied with bureaucracy. "I am reviewing the numbers. To make this work, I need to see the actual invoices for Delaney's legal team and a breakdown of the monthly expenses you are claiming. If I am going to sell the apartment, I need to know exactly where the money is going." It was a reasonable request, or rather, it sounded reasonable to someone who thought they had won. To a liar. However, it was an invitation to elaborate on the lie. I requested a formal mediation session to finalize the agreement. I insisted that everything be done via email or official discovery channels prior to the meeting so that we could move quickly when we met. They interpreted this as my capitulation. They thought I was trying to expedite the check writing. In reality, I was building an evidence locker. The first victory came on a Tuesday morning. I had asked, through Miles, for a clarification on the educational withdrawals from the Kauts-R Trust. I phrased the query innocently. I asked if the $50,000 withdrawn last month was for a specific tuition payment, as I needed to categorize it for tax purposes if I was going to be contributing to the family pool. My father, usually cautious, was so eager to secure my buy-in that he bypassed his lawyer and emailed me directly. Quinn, the withdrawals from the trust are just a temporary bridge loan to the family operating account. We had to move fast to secure Delaney's representation. We will pay it back with interest once the liquidity crisis is resolved. It is just internal bookkeeping. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the mouse. Internal bookkeeping. He had just admitted, in writing, to commingling trust funds with personal funds. He had admitted to using money designated for his grandchildren's education to pay for his daughter's legal defense. He called it a loan. The law called it embezzlement. There was no loan agreement. There was no repayment schedule. There was just theft, justified by arrogance. I forwarded the email to Miles. Exhibit C, admission of fiduciary breach. Next, I turned my attention to Delaney. My sister was less cautious than my parents. She was currently playing the role of the victim on social media, posting vague, black-and-white photos with captions about betrayal and rising from the ashes. I sent her a direct message. I am looking at the legal fees. Del. $75,000 for a retainer seems incredibly high for a standard divorce. Are you sure this lawyer isn't ripping you off? If I am going to help pay for this, I want to make sure you are getting value. I played to her vanity. I played to her fear of being taken advantage of, she replied 4 minutes later. He is not a standard lawyer. Quinn, he is a specialist. Todd is trying to destroy me. We have to pay for the NDA drafting and the suppression orders. If we don't pay the silence fee, Todd is going to leak everything. You don't understand how dangerous he is. Silence fee, suppression orders. She had just confirmed that the money was not for litigation. It was for a cover-up. In a standard divorce, you fight for assets. You do not pay silence fees unless there is something criminal to hide. She had inadvertently corroborated the insider trading theory. I screenshotted the conversation. Exhibit D. Confirmation of illicit purpose. While they were busy digging their own graves via email, I was moving pieces on the board that they could not see. I had Miles issue a subpoena to the bank in Delaware regarding the fraudulent loan, but I did not ask for the digital records. I asked for the metadata of the DocuSign session and the IP address of the computer used to upload the wet signature document. I also sent a subpoena to the firm managing the N.R. Trust. I wanted the original trust instrument and the logs of every login to the trustee portal for the last 12 months. Then, I made a phone call that I knew would light a fuse, though the explosion would be delayed. I called my cousin, Sarah. Sarah was the daughter of my mother's sister. She was 28, a teacher in New Jersey, and she had a 2-year-old son. She was one of the beneficiaries of the N.R. Trust. Quinn, she said, surprised. I haven't heard from you since Christmas. Is everything okay? Everything is fine. I lied smoothly. I'm just doing some estate planning of my own. And I was looking over the old documents from Nana Rose. I wanted to check something with you. Have you received your annual statement for the trust this year? Sarah said. Aunt Elaine usually sends them out in January, but I haven't seen one in a while. Why I paused, letting the silence do the work. I would suggest you ask her for it. Sarah, I saw some activity on the main ledger that looked unusual. I am sure it is nothing. But given the economy, you might want to make sure the principal is still intact for Leo's college fund. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. What do you mean? Unusual. Just ask for the statement. Sarah, and if she doesn't give it to you within 48 hours, you might want to call the bank directly. I did not tell her the money was gone. I did not tell her about the lawsuit. I simply planted the seed of doubt. Sarah was tenacious. She would call. She would email. And when my mother tried to dodge her, Sarah would get suspicious. My parents were now fighting a war on 2 fronts, but they only knew about one. They thought they were pacifying me, unaware that the flank was collapsing behind them. By Thursday, the pressure from my parents to sign a preliminary support agreement was intensifying. They sent a draft document. It was a terrifying piece of fiction. It stipulated that I would pay them $4,000 a month for consulting services regarding family estate management, another way to hide the income, and that I would list my apartment for sale within 30 days. In exchange, they agreed to pause the lawsuit. Not drop it? Pause it? They were keeping the knife at my throat while asking for my wallet. My mother called me that evening. Her voice was syrupy sweet, the voice she used when she wanted to show off her perfect family to the neighbors. Quinn, darling, did you get the agreement? Dad and I are so relieved. We can finally put this ugliness behind us. We just need you to sign it tonight so we can forward the retainer to Delaney's team tomorrow morning. It is urgent. I sat in my dark living room, the glow of the city lights reflecting off the glass table where the real evidence lay spread out. I need a few more days. Mom, I said. My voice was shaky. I practiced the wobble. I need to get the appraisal on the apartment, and Miles is insisting on one final review of the language. You know how lawyers are. Don't let him bill you for nonsense. Quinn, she said sharply, her tone hardening instantly. We don't have a few days. We have until Monday. I can't sign it yet. I said, but I can meet you. Let's do the mediation on Monday morning. I will bring the checkbook. We can sign everything then. Monday, she asked. That is cutting it very close. It is the best I can do. I said, I want to look you in the eye when we fix this. Mom, I want us to be a family again. I almost gagged as I said the words. There was a pause. I could hear her calculating. She was weighing the risk of waiting against the promise of the payout. She was greedy, and greed makes people stupid. Fine, she said. Monday at 10 o'clock, at our lawyer's office in Center City, but bring the check. Quinn, if you walk in there empty-handed, the deal is off, and we are going for the maximum judgment. We will be there. I said. I hung up. I looked at the calendar. Monday was 4 days away. That gave me 96 hours. 96 hours for the bank in Delaware to return the IP address confirming the forgery came from their house. 96 hours for Sarah to demand the trust statements and realize the money was gone. 96 hours for Miles to compile the final Exhibit Z, the one that would tie it all together. I was not stalling to save my money. I was stalling to build a cage. They wanted a check, I would bring them a check. But I would also bring a 3-inch binder that documented every lie, every theft, and every betrayal they had committed in the last 5 years. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady. The fear I had felt in the beginning, the primal fear of losing my parents' love, was gone. You cannot lose what never existed. They did not love me. They loved the utility I provided. I was about to show them exactly how useful I could be. I would be the most efficient, thorough, and devastating auditor they had ever encountered. I checked my email one last time before bed. A notification from the bank in Delaware had just arrived. Subject Fraud Investigation Update. IP. Trace complete. I opened it. The location of the device that uploaded the forged document was listed as a residential address in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. The trap was not just set. It had just snapped shut. All that was left was to walk into the room on Monday and let them see the teeth. The weekend before the mediation was supposed to be a ceasefire, but my family did not understand the concept of a truce. To them, silence was not an opportunity for reflection. It was an opportunity to reload. On Friday night, the social media campaign began. I was sitting on my couch, reviewing the metadata from the bank in Delaware. When my phone screen lit up, it was a notification from Facebook. I had not posted on Facebook in 3 years, but I kept the account active for professional networking. I had restricted my parents' access to my timeline years ago, but that did not stop them from posting on their own walls and setting the privacy to public. My mother had posted a long, rambling paragraph. It was accompanied by a photo of a broken ceramic vase, an image she had likely found on Google Images to symbolize her shattered heart. It is a tragedy when you pour your life into a child, she wrote, only to have them turn their back on you in your hour of greatest need. We sacrificed our golden years to build a future for our daughters. One appreciates it. The other has chosen greed over blood. Pray for our family as we deal with this betrayal. She did not name me. She did not have to. Within 20 minutes, the comments section was filled with sympathetic noises from her country club friends and distant relatives. So sorry to hear this. Elaine, one wrote, some children just don't have a conscience. Stay strong. Another added, money changes people. I watched the comments roll in like a tide of sewage. It was a calculated performance. She was priming the jury of public opinion. She wanted to make sure that if I refused to pay, I would be a social pariah in their circle. Then Delaney joined the fray. She did not post publicly. She worked the back channels. I began receiving text messages from people I had not spoken to since high school. People who were friends with Delaney and had clearly been fed a distorted version of reality. "Hey, Quinn?" A message from an old neighbor read, "I heard about what is happening with your parents. I know you're doing well at that big firm, but don't you think you should help them out? Your mom is really torn up." Another came from a cousin in Ohio. "Quinn, Delaney says you are letting them lose the house. Is that true? We are family. You can't just sit on a pile of money while they drown." They were painting a picture of me as a miser, a Scrooge McDuck, sitting in a tower of gold coins while my saintly parents starved. The narrative was simple. Quinn is rich and cold. Delaney and the parents are poor and victimized. I did not reply to any of them. I did not defend myself. In the court of law, these texts were irrelevant. In the court of public opinion, I had already resigned my membership. But on Saturday morning, the harassment escalated from digital shaming to legal vandalism. Miles called me at 9 in the morning. He sounded annoyed. "Quinn, we have a problem," he said. "They just filed a lis pendens against your apartment." I froze. I knew what that meant. Lis pendens is Latin for suit pending. It is a formal notice filed with the county recorder's office indicating that the property is subject to a legal dispute. It effectively clouds the title. It meant I could not sell the apartment, refinance it, or use it as collateral until the lawsuit was resolved. They were trying to lock me down. They are claiming that since the apartment was purchased with family resources, which is a lie, they have an equitable interest in the property. Miles explained, "It is a frivolous filing. It is designed to squeeze you. They want to make sure you can't liquidate the asset and run, or they just want to hold the property hostage to force a settlement." It was a dirty tactic. It was the legal equivalent of slashing my tires. "Can we get it removed?" I asked. "Yes," Miles said. "I am filing an emergency motion to expunge it on Monday morning. I will argue that the underlying lawsuit has no merit and that this is a malicious abuse of process. I will ask for sanctions. If the judge agrees, they will have to pay our legal fees for fighting this specific motion." "Do it," I said. And Miles, yes. "Add the cost of removing this lien to the damages we are going to claim later. I want them to pay for every minute of your time that they are wasting." I hung up. My hand was shaking, not with fear, but with a cold, vibrating anger. They were attacking my home. They were trying to put a mark on the one thing that was truly mine. I realized then that I needed to protect my other sanctuary, my job. If they were willing to file a false lien, they were willing to show up at my office. My mother had threatened it before. She had said she would humiliate me in front of my boss. I could not let that happen. Northbridge Risk Partners was a place of order and logic. I could not let the chaos of the Reyes family infect it. I drafted an email to the Director of Human Resources. I kept it brief, professional, and devoid of emotional baggage. Subject: personal security matter. Notification of potential harassment. Dear Sarah, I am writing to inform you of a personal legal matter involving a dispute with estranged family members. While I do not anticipate this affecting my work performance, there is a remote possibility that these individuals may attempt to contact me at the office or appear at the reception desk to cause a disruption. Please inform the security team that Mark Reyes, Elaine Reyes, and Delaney Reyes are not authorized to visit me. If they appear, they should be denied entry. I have attached their photographs for reference. I apologize for any inconvenience this may cause and appreciate the firm's support in maintaining a secure work environment. I hit send. It felt like swallowing a stone. I was a vice president. I was a respected professional. Having to warn my employer that my parents might cause a scene in the lobby was humiliating, but it was a necessary firewall. I was closing the gates. By Sunday, my parents realized that the lis pendens and the Facebook posts had not produced a phone call from me. I had not begged them to stop. I had not offered to settle early, so they played their next card. My father sent me an email at 2 in the afternoon. The subject line was simply, "The truth." "Quinn," it read, "if you do not come to the table on Monday with a reasonable offer, we are going to have to be honest with the court about your history. We will be forced to testify about your behavioral issues as a child, the expenses we incurred for your therapy, and the trouble you caused us. We have protected your reputation for years. Do not force us to destroy it." I stared at the screen. Behavioral issues therapy. I had never been to therapy as a child. I had never caused trouble. I was the straight-A student who came home, did her homework, and read books in her room to avoid drawing attention to herself. The trouble I caused was simply existing in a way that did not serve their vanity. They were gaslighting me. They were inventing a history of delinquency to justify their claim that I owed them. They were threatening to paint me as a troubled, unstable child that they had saved, thereby justifying the repayment they were demanding. But they had made a fatal error. They assumed I still cared what people thought of me. They assumed I was still that little girl who wanted to be good. I was not that girl. I was a woman who had just received a FedEx package from a handwriting expert named Dr. Eris Thorne. I opened the package. Inside was a sworn affidavit and a 10-page report. Dr. Thorne had analyzed the signature on the fraudulent loan document from the Delaware Bank. He had compared it to 20 known samples of my signature from my lease, my passport, and old birthday cards, and 20 known samples of my mother's handwriting. His conclusion was devastatingly clear. It is my professional opinion, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that the signature on the guarantor agreement is a forgery. Furthermore, the stylistic markers, specifically the loop of the R and the pressure points on the terminal strokes, are highly consistent with the handwriting of Elaine Reyes. But the report contained something even better. I had provided Miles with my travel records for the date the loan was signed. On that specific day, 6 months ago, I was not in Bryn Mawr. I was not even in Pennsylvania. I was in Chicago for a risk management conference. I had the flight manifest. I had the hotel receipt. I had the credit card charge for a room service dinner at the Palmer House Hilton at 7 in the evening, the exact same hour the bank's metadata showed the document was uploaded from my parents' IP address in Bryn Mawr. I could not have signed that document. It was physically impossible. I pinned the report to my wall, right next to the flowchart of the trust fund theft. The picture was complete. They had lied about being destitute. They had stolen from my grandmother's trust. They were laundering money to cover up Delaney's insider trading. They had forged my signature on a $75,000 loan. They had filed a fraudulent lien on my home. And now, they were threatening to commit perjury by inventing a fictional childhood for me. They were throwing everything they had at me: mud, lies, legal filings, guilt. They were trying to break me psychologically so I would open my checkbook, but I did not feel broken. I felt clarified. I looked at the unstable child email from my father again. I did not delete it. I printed it. It went into the binder as Exhibit E attempted extortion. I spent the rest of Sunday afternoon prepping for the mediation. I did not bake cookies. I did not watch TV. I organized the binder. Tab A. The Destitute Myth. Bank statements showing luxury spending. Tab B. The Trust Fund Theft. The flowchart and withdrawal logs. Tab C. The cover-up emails regarding the silence fee and Delaney's consulting firm. Tab D. The forgery, the loan document, the handwriting analysis, and my Chicago alibi. Tab E. The malice. The threats, the list pendants, the social media posts. It was 3 inches thick. It weighed 4 pounds. At 8 in the evening, I received one last text from Delaney. "Mom is crying. I hope you are happy. You are tearing this family apart." I looked at the message. For the first time in my life, I did not feel the reflex to fix it. I did not feel the urge to apologize. I typed a reply, but I did not send it. I'm not tearing the family apart. Delaney, I am just the one turning on the lights. I deleted the draft. Silence was a better weapon. Let them think I was scared. Let them think I was scrambling to find the money. Let them walk into that conference room thinking they were about to fleece a sheep. I went to bed early. I slept soundly. The next morning, Monday, broke cold and clear. I dressed in my sharpest suit, a charcoal gray tailored jacket and trousers that looked like armor. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I applied my makeup with precision. I looked in the mirror. I did not look like the daughter of Mark and Elaine Reyes. I did not look like the sister of Delaney Reyes. I looked like the vice president of Northbridge Risk Partners. I picked up the binder. It was heavy in my hand. My parents thought they were fighting a battle for money. They thought they were punishing a rebellious child. They thought they were targeting my heart, but they were wrong. My heart was not in the room. My heart was safe behind the walls of the fortress I had built. They were not fighting a person. They were fighting a correction mechanism. They were an error in the system, a variance that had gone unchecked for too long. And today, I was finally going to balance the ledger. I walked out of my apartment, past the front desk where I nodded to the doorman, and stepped into the Uber that would take me to the slaughter. I checked my phone one last time. Miles had sent a message. "I am ready. Are you?" I typed back one word. "Proceed." The timeline for the destruction of the Reyes family facade accelerated rapidly on Sunday afternoon. It started with a ripple, the kind that looks innocent until it turns into a rogue wave. I was sitting in my living room, the binder of evidence open on my lap, when my phone pinged with a notification from the family cloud account. I had set up an alert for any failed login attempts. Alert failed login. IP address: Bryn Mawr, PA. Time: 2:14 p.m. Alert failed login. IP address: Bryn Mawr, PA. Time: 2:15 p.m. Alert failed login. IP address: Bryn Mawr, PA. Time: 2:16 p.m. My father was trying to get into the system. He was hammering at the digital door I had locked days ago. He was not trying to get in to look at vacation photos. He was panic cleaning. 10 minutes later, I understood why. My cousin Sarah had not just asked for the trust statement. She had mobilized the infantry. I received a text from my cousin David, who lived in Chicago and worked in compliance for a major bank. "Quinn, Sarah just called me. She says Aunt Elaine is refusing to release our trust financials. She says you told her to look into it. What is going on? I am drafting a formal demand letter as a beneficiary. If the money is not there, I am going to the authorities." The seed I had planted had not just grown, it had turned into a forest fire. The cousins were communicating. They were comparing notes. They realized that the delays and the accounting errors my mother had used as excuses for the last 6 months were not incompetence. They were evasion. My parents were now trapped in a two-front war. On the front porch, they had the lawsuit against me, claiming they were destitute and needed my support. At the back door, they had the cousins demanding to know where the $500,000 in the trust fund had gone. If they told the court they had money, I would win. If they told the cousins they had no money, they would go to prison for embezzlement. They needed to delete the evidence of the transfers. They needed to scrub the bank statements that showed the money flowing from the trust to Delaney's shell company, but they could not delete anything. I held the administrative keys. Every time my father typed in his old password and saw the access denied screen, his heart rate must have spiked. He was trying to burn the ledger, but I had fireproofed the room. I watched the failed login attempts continue for an hour. It was the digital equivalent of watching a rat run into the walls of a glass maze. While they were distracted by the cousins, I turned my attention to the mysterious Sterling and Hearth firm. I had seen the payments on the credit card statements. $10,000 here, $5,000 there. My initial search had told me they were crisis management, but I needed specifics. I used a private investigator tool that Northbridge subscribed to. It allowed us to see the corporate filings and recognized associates of vendors. Sterling and Hearth was not a public relations firm. It was a digital sanitation agency. Their website was vague, filled with buzzwords like narrative control and legacy protection. But when I dug into the forums where their former employees posted, the picture became clear. They were fixers. They did not write press releases. They paid off bloggers to take down stories. They used bots to flood search results with positive noise to bury negative headlines. They negotiated kill fees with tabloids. And then I found the connection. One of the payments to Sterling and Hearth was tagged in the metadata with a reference number. I cross-referenced it with a leak from a legal database that Miles had access to. The reference number was linked to a specific service, forensic scrubbing/device wipe. My parents were not just paying for Delaney's image. They were paying to remotely wipe devices or scrub servers that might contain the evidence of the insider trading. They were paying to destroy the very evidence that the Securities and Exchange Commission would be looking for. This was obstruction of justice, and they were using the stolen trust fund money to pay for it. Then, the cracks in their internal alliance began to show. I was monitoring my father's email. I still had access, even though he was locked out of the administrative settings. He was using a backup Gmail account to communicate with Delaney, thinking it was secure. He did not realize that he had forwarded a copy of the thread to the main family address 3 days ago, and because I controlled the main address, I saw it. It was an email from Delaney. It was sent at 3 a.m. "Mom, Dad, you have to find the money for the next installment. Sterling says if we miss the payment on Tuesday, they stop the suppression work. If they stop, the story about the trade leaks. Todd's lawyer knows. He sent a letter today saying that if I don't sign the settlement giving up all claims to the house, he is going to file the evidence of the leak with the court. If he does that, I go to jail. Please, you said Quinn would pay. Make her pay." There it was, the smoking gun. Make her pay. They were not suing me for support. They were suing me to pay the ransom for my sister's freedom. They were willing to sacrifice my financial future, my home, and my reputation to keep Delaney out of a federal penitentiary. I printed the email. I slipped it into the binder under tab C. It was no longer just a theory, it was a conspiracy. Then, a new notification arrived from Miles. "Quinn, look at the attachment. This just came from Todd's counsel." It was a courtesy copy sent to us because of the lis pendens. I opened the document. It was a letter from Todd's divorce attorney to my parents' lawyer. It was brutal. "Dear counsel, it has come to our attention that your clients, Mark and Elaine Reyes, are claiming financial destitution in a separate legal matter involving their daughter, Quinn Reyes. We find this claim interesting, given that your clients have paid a retainer of $75,000 to your firm and have made payments totaling $40,000 to Sterling and Hearth in the last 90 days. Please be advised that if your clients continue to delay the divorce settlement by making unreasonable financial demands on my client, we will be forced to submit these spending records to the court to demonstrate that they are not, in fact, in need of spousal support, but are rather engaged in the dissipation of marital assets to fund a criminal defense." Todd's lawyer was tired of their games. He was threatening to blow the whistle. I sat back in my chair. The net was tightening. The cousins were attacking from the flank. Todd was attacking from the rear. And I was standing in front of them with a flamethrower. I called Miles. "We are not settling." I said, "Quinn, the mediation is tomorrow." Miles warned, "If we walk away, they might get a judge to sign a temporary order. Let them try." I said, "I want to change the strategy for tomorrow. We go to the meeting, but we do not go to negotiate a payment. We go to take a deposition. We can't depose them at a mediation," Miles said. "We can if we turn it into a settlement conference on the record." I said, "Tell them I am willing to sign the check for the full amount they are asking. Tell them I am ready to fund the entire family recovery plan." Miles was silent for a moment. "You are lying to them. I am managing the risk." I said, "Tell them I will pay, but tell them that for tax purposes, and because the amount is over $100,000. I need them to swear under oath that the information in their lawsuit is true. I need them to affirm on the record that they are destitute and that the money is for basic living expenses. Tell them it is just a formality for my accountant. They will do it," Miles said. "They are greedy. If they think they are getting the check, they will sign anything." "Exactly," I said. "And once they swear under oath that they are destitute, we hit them with the bank statements." Miles finished. "We hit them with the trust fund withdrawals. We hit them with the luxury spending. And the forgery," I added. "Don't forget the forgery. It is a perjury trap," Miles said. "It is beautiful. It is a market correction. I corrected him. They have been trading on false valuations for too long. Tomorrow. The bubble bursts. I spent the rest of the night finalizing the binder. I added a new section, Tab F, the timeline of lies. I mapped it out hour by hour. January 15th. Nana Rose's trust drained of $50,000. January 16th. Transfer to D. Reyes Strategies, LLC. January 17th. Payment to Sterling and Hearth. February 1st. Parents file lawsuit claiming destitution due to divorce costs. February 15th. Parents forge my signature on the loan for $75,000. March 1st. Delaney sends the email admitting the money is for suppression. It was irrefutable. It was a map of intent. They had not stumbled into this. They had engineered it. I looked at the guarantor agreement with the fake signature one last time. My mother had signed my name. She had committed a felony against her own daughter to save the daughter she actually loved. That hurt. I would be lying if I said it didn't hurt. But the pain was distant. Like a bruised rib, you only feel when you take a deep breath. I wasn't taking deep breaths anymore. I was holding my breath, waiting to exhale only when the job was done. I sent a text to Sarah. Keep pressing for the statements. Sarah, do not let them delay. You will have your answers tomorrow. I sent a text to the HR director at Northbridge. Security threat level remains high. Please ensure the lobby is alerted for tomorrow morning. I will be out of the office until noon. Then I closed the binder. The snap of the ring sounded like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere in Bryn Mawr. My parents were probably celebrating. They probably thought they had won. They probably thought that my agreement to meet meant I had broken, that the pressure of the Liz Pendens and the social media shaming had been too much for me. They thought they were the chess masters. They didn't realize they were just pieces on a board I had already flipped over. Tomorrow, they would walk into a conference room expecting a check. Instead, they were going to walk into an autopsy of their own lives. I went to my closet and picked out my outfit for the morning. I chose a white silk blouse and a black blazer. Sharp, clean, clinical. I was not going to scream. I was not going to cry. I was not going to ask them why they didn't love me. I was going to do what I did best. I was going to present the data, and the data was going to ruin them. The conference room at the law firm of Vance, Eldridge, and Associates was designed to intimidate. It was situated on the 42nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Philadelphia, a subtle reminder that the people sitting at the mahogany table were the masters of the city. But today, the room felt less like a seat of power and more like a theater stage where a very bad play was about to be performed. I arrived exactly at 10 o'clock. Miles was already there, sitting on the left side of the long table, his posture relaxed but alert. On the right side sat my parents and their attorney, a man named Mr. Vance who wore a bow tie and a smile that did not reach his eyes. I almost didn't recognize Mark and Elaine Reyes. Gone were the tailored suits and the silk scarves. Gone was the arrogant posture of the country club set. They had performed a costume change that was almost impressive in its cynicism. My father was wearing a cardigan that looked slightly frayed at the cuffs, a garment I had never seen him own. My mother was wearing a simple, nondescript beige dress and flat shoes. She wore no jewelry, no wedding ring, no diamond studs, no Cartier watch. They were dressed as the destitute elderly. They were playing the role of the abandoned parents to perfection. I sat down next to Miles. I placed my heavy black binder on the table. I did not open it. I just let it sit there, a silent monolith between us. "Good morning." "Quinn," Mr. Vance said. His voice was dripping with paternalistic condescension. "I am glad you decided to do the right thing. It takes a big person to admit when they have lost their way." I looked at him. I did not blink. "I am here to listen." I said, "Mr. Vance nodded, taking this as submission. He opened a thin file folder. "We are here to finalize the support agreement." He began, "My clients, your parents, have reached a point of financial critical mass. They have exhausted their savings to help your sister during her difficult transition. They have been forced to leverage their home. They are, quite frankly, at the end of their rope." He paused for effect. looking at me over his spectacles. The law, Quinn, is not just about statutes. It is about moral obligation. These two people gave you life. They fed you, clothed you, and educated you, and now, when they ask for a small fraction of what they gave you, you respond with resistance. It is disheartening, but we are willing to overlook your initial hesitation if you sign the agreement today. My mother sniffed loudly. She pulled a tissue from her sleeve and dabbed at dry eyes. We just want to survive. Quinn, she whispered, we don't want to be a burden, but we have nowhere else to turn. I watched her. I watched the performance. I knew for a fact that she had spent $400 at a spa in Wayne 3 days ago. I knew she had driven here in a Range Rover that cost more than most people earn in 2 years. Miles cleared his throat. He did not look impressed by the speech. We are prepared to discuss the settlement, Miles said. However, given the significant amount you are requesting, $4,500 a month, plus a lump sum from the sale of the apartment, my client requires a formal affirmation of your financial status. Mr. Vance bristled. We have already provided the affidavit. We need it on the record, Miles said smoothly. We have a court reporter present. Since this agreement will effectively liquidate my client's primary asset, we need to ensure that the basis for the claim is unassailable. If your clients are truly destitute, they should have no problem stating that under oath. Mr. Vance looked at my parents. My father nodded eagerly. He was looking at the checkbook I had placed on the table. Not the binder. He saw the money. He didn't see the trap. We have nothing to hide. My father said. Good, Miles said. He signaled to the court reporter. A woman in the corner with a stenography machine. She nodded. Mark Reyes. Do you swear to tell the truth? The whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do, my father said. He sat up straighter, adjusting his frayed cardigan. Mr. Reyes, Miles began, his voice level and professional. You claim in your lawsuit that you have no liquid assets and that your monthly expenses exceed your income by $5,000. Is that correct? That is correct, my father said. We have been living on credit cards. We are tapped out. The market downturn hit my retirement accounts hard, and the rest went to family emergencies. And by family emergencies, you mean the legal fees for your daughter, Delaney. Yes. My father said, divorce is expensive. We had to hire the best to protect her. And do you have any other sources of income? Miles asked. Any consulting fees? Any business interests? No, my father said firmly. I am retired. I have a small pension, but it barely covers the mortgage. We are completely reliant on our savings, which are now gone. I sat perfectly still. He had just lied. He had just committed perjury. I knew about the $5,000 a month flowing into his account from the trust, and the consulting fees he was writing off. Miles turned to my mother. And you, Mrs. Reyes, do you have access to any other funds? Any trusts? Any inheritances? My mother froze for a split second. Her eyes darted to the binder on the table, then back to Miles. No, she said, her voice trembling. My mother passed away 6 years ago. Her estate was settled long ago. There is nothing left. Nothing left, Miles repeated. So, the N.R. trust is empty. It was a specific question, a dangerous question. My mother clutched her tissue. It has been depleted, she stammered. The market was very bad. We had to use the principal for essential maintenance on the property. It is gone. She was lying. The market had been up 18% last year. The trust was not depleted by the market. It was depleted by her withdrawals. Miles made a note on his legal pad. The scratching of his pen was the only sound in the room. And what about D. Reyes Strategies, LLC? Miles asked. We noticed some transfers to that entity. Can you explain what that is? Mr. Vance interjected. Objection. That is irrelevant. That is a small family business venture. It has no assets. We are just trying to understand the cash flow. Miles said. Mrs. Reyes, what does that company do? My mother looked at my father. Panic flickered behind her eyes. It is a consulting firm, she said. For Delaney. She does some social media consulting. We tried to help her get it started. But it hasn't made any money. It is a loss. A loss, Miles repeated. So the money transferred into it was for business expenses. Yes, my father interrupted. Startup costs. Marketing. It is all gone. I looked at the binder. Under tab C, I had the invoice from Sterling and Hearth for suppression services. That was not marketing. That was a payoff. Suddenly, the door to the conference room burst open. The drama was not complete without the star. Delaney walked in. She was breathless, her cheeks flushed. Unlike my parents, she had not dressed down. She was wearing a white cashmere coat and carrying a designer bag that I knew cost $3,000. She brought the scent of expensive floral perfume into the sterile room. "I am so sorry I'm late," she exclaimed. "The traffic was a nightmare." She looked at the room, reading the tension. She immediately softened her expression, putting on the face of the wounded bird. "Quinn," she said, walking toward me with her arms open. She ignored the lawyers. She ignored the court reporter. She went straight for the emotional jugular. "I am so glad you came." She tried to hug me. I did not stand up. I remained seated, my body rigid. She awkwardly patted my shoulder and then took the seat next to my mother. "We don't want to fight." "Quinn," Delaney said, turning to look at me with wide, wet eyes. "I know you think I am spoiled. I know you think I have made mistakes. But this is about family. Mom and Dad are suffering. Look at them." She gestured to my parents, who hung their heads shamefully. "They have given everything for me," Delaney said, "and now Todd is trying to ruin me. He is trying to take my reputation. If we don't have the funds to fight him, he wins. Do you want him to win? Do you want your little sister to be destroyed?" I looked at her. I looked at the three of them, the unholy trinity of my life. I spoke for the first time since the deposition began. "What exactly is Todd threatening to reveal?" "Delaney," I asked. The room went quiet. Delaney's eyes widened. She looked at Mr. Vance, then at my parents. "Just personal things," she stammered. "Lies. He is making up lies about my spending. And, other things. He is vindictive. Other things," I repeated. "Like the insider trading, Mr. Vance slammed his hand on the table. "Objection. That is slander. We are here to discuss support, not to indulge in conspiracy theories. This is harassment." My father stood up. His face was red. "See? This is what she does. She twists everything. We come here in good faith. We bare our souls. And she accuses us of crimes." My mother started crying in earnest now. A low, wailing sound. "I can't take this. Mark, she is heartless. She wants to see us on the street." They were ramping up the pressure. They sensed that I was getting too close to the truth, so they were trying to drown me in noise. Mr. Vance looked at me. "Ms. Reyes, this is your final chance. Sign the agreement. Agree to the sale of the apartment, or we walk out of here, and we file a motion for immediate relief, and we will ask the court for attorney's fees. We will paint you as a monster." My father leaned forward. "We really are destitute. Quinn, look at me. I have nothing. If you don't help us, we are finished." He said it with such conviction. He almost believed it himself. I looked at Miles. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. We had it. We had the sworn testimony. We had the denial of assets. We had the lies about the trust. We had the denial of the illicit nature of the LLC. They had walked into the cage and locked the door from the inside. "I need a moment," I said. My parents stopped their wailing. Hope flared in their eyes. They thought I was cracking. They thought the pressure had worked. "I need to consult with my attorney regarding the payment schedule." I said, "If I am going to write a check, I need to verify the liquidity in my own accounts." Mr. Vance smiled, a smug, victorious smile. "Take all the time you need. Quinn, we will be right here." Miles and I stood up. I picked up my purse, but I left the black binder on the table. It sat there, ominous and heavy. We walked out of the conference room and into the hallway. The door clicked shut behind us. Miles let out a long breath. "They are insane," he whispered. "They just committed perjury 6 times in 10 minutes. "I know." I said, Did you see Vance's face? Miles asked. He doesn't know. They haven't told him about the trust or the forgery. He thinks he is fighting a support case. He has no idea he is facilitating a fraud. He will know soon enough. I said, "So, what is the play?" Miles asked. "Do we go back in there and settle?" "You could offer them a small amount to make them go away. You have enough dirt to force a very favorable settlement." I looked through the glass wall of the conference room. I could see them. My father was high-fiving Mr. Vance. My mother was fixing her makeup. Delaney was checking her phone. They were celebrating. They were laughing. They were laughing because they thought they had successfully manipulated me. They thought that by playing the victim, by forging my name, by stealing from my grandmother, and by lying to the court, they had won. If I settled now, even for a small amount, they would learn nothing. They would just find another way to exploit me later. They would think they survived. "I don't want a settlement," I said. Miles looked at me. "Then what do you want?" "I want a correction," I said. I looked at the binder sitting on the table inside the room. "I am not going to offer them a deal," I said. "I am going to end this. We are going back in there, and we are going to open the binder." Miles smiled. It was a sharp, predatory smile. I was hoping you would say that. We stood there for another minute, letting them stew in their premature victory. I adjusted my jacket. I checked my reflection in the glass. I did not look tired. I looked ready. I walked back to the door. This was it. The moment I had been training for since I was 16 years old. The moment where the glass child finally shattered the glass house. I opened the door. The laughter in the room stopped. My father looked up, a smile still lingering on his lips. "Well," he asked, "do we have a deal?" I walked to the table. I did not sit down. I stood at the head of the table, looking down at them. I reached out and placed my hand on the black binder. "No," I said, "we don't have a deal, but we do have a problem," and I flipped the cover open. The conference room door had barely clicked shut behind me in Part 9, but the real theater was about to begin in the courtroom. We had left the settlement conference without signing a thing. Instead, Miles had filed an emergency motion to dismiss the lawsuit and to expunge the Lispendens the lien they had placed on my apartment based on fraud on the court. Now, 48 hours later, we stood before Judge Harlan in the Court of Common Pleas. My parents sat at the plaintiff's table. They looked confident. They had dispensed with the frayed cardigans and were back in their Sunday best, perhaps thinking that a judge would respect a well-dressed elderly couple more than a corporate shark like me. Delaney sat in the gallery behind them, wearing large sunglasses, looking like a celebrity avoiding the paparazzi. They thought this hearing was just a formality. They thought the judge would tell me to stop being difficult and support my family. They had no idea that the binder I had opened in the conference room was now sitting on the judge's bench. Judge Harlan adjusted his glasses and looked down at my parents' lawyer. "Mr. Vance." "Counsel," the judge said, his voice deep and resonating in the wood-paneled room. "Your clients are asserting that they are destitute and require spousal support from their daughter under the Filial Responsibility Statute. They are also claiming an equitable interest in her property. Is that the summary?" "Yes, Your Honor," Mr. Vance said, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "My clients are in dire financial straits. They have liquidated their life savings to handle a family crisis. Their daughter has significant assets and has refused to assist." The judge nodded slowly. He turned to Miles. "Mr. Kerrigan." Miles stood up. He did not wave his arms. He did not raise his voice. He simply picked up a single piece of paper. "Your Honor," Miles said, "we move to dismiss this case with prejudice immediately. We also ask the court to refer this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into perjury, identity theft, and fraud." A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. Mr. Vance scoffed audibly. "Your Honor, this is theatrics." "It is not theatrics," Miles said. "It is arithmetic." He pointed to the binder in front of the judge. "Your Honor, please turn to Exhibit A." The judge flipped the heavy cover. The room was silent. "The plaintiffs claim they are destitute," Miles continued. "Yet, Exhibit A contains a forensic audit of their bank accounts for the last 12 months. You will see recurring transfers totaling $60,000 to an entity known as D. Reyes Strategies, LLC. You will also see credit card statements showing monthly expenditures of $2,000 for country club dues, $1,200 for luxury vehicle leases, and $4,000 for clothing and travel. Mr. Vance froze. He looked at his clients. My father was staring straight ahead, his jaw working tight. Miles did not stop. If you look at the source of these funds, Your Honor, you will see they were not derived from income. They were siphoned from the N.R. Trust, a fund legally designated for the educational expenses of the plaintiff's grandchildren. We have attached the trust bylaws and the withdrawal logs. They have drained nearly $500,000 in less than 2 years. The judge looked up from the binder. His eyes were hard. Mr. Vance, were you aware of these assets, Mr. Vance's face had gone a pale, sickly shade of gray. No, Your Honor, I was told. My clients informed me they had no liquid assets. My mother let out a small, strangled sound. There is more, Miles said, cutting her off. Please turn to Exhibit B. The judge turned the page. My clients, the plaintiffs, submitted a loan document to a bank in Delaware 6 months ago for $75,000. Miles said, they listed my client, Quinn Reyes, as the guarantor. He paused, letting the weight of the accusation settle. Exhibit B contains a sworn affidavit from Dr. Eris Thorne, a certified forensic document examiner. It states that the signature of Quinn Reyes on that document is a forgery. Furthermore, we have attached travel records proving that on the day the document was signed and uploaded from the plaintiff's IP address in Bryn Mawr, Ms. Reyes was physically located in Chicago, Illinois. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing for a split second before catching up. Identity theft, Miles said softly. To secure a loan they are now defaulting on, creating a liability for my client without her consent. Mr. Vance physically took a half step away from my parents. He looked at them with a mixture of horror and professional fury. To lie to your lawyer is a sin. To make your lawyer lie to a judge is a career-ending move. But Miles had one last nail for the coffin. Exhibit C, Your Honor. The judge turned the page. The plaintiffs claim the money was spent on family emergencies. Miles said, Exhibit C contains an email thread between the plaintiffs and their daughter, Delaney Reyes. In it, they explicitly discuss using these funds to pay a firm called Sterling and Hearth, to suppress evidence of insider trading, and to pay a settlement to prevent the exposure of criminal conduct in a divorce proceeding. Delaney stood up in the back row. That is private, she shouted. You can't read that. Sit down, the bailiff barked. The judge looked over his glasses at Delaney. You are not a party to this lawsuit, ma'am. Be seated or be removed. Delaney sat down. Her face flushed with blotchy red anger. The judge looked back at the binder. He read the email. He read the invoice from the crisis management firm. He read the timeline I had constructed. He closed the binder. The sound was like a gavel strike. He looked at my parents, Mark and Elaine Reyes, the judge said. His voice was no longer deep and resonant. It was sharp, like a serrated blade. Do you wish to continue to assert to this court that you are destitute? It was the question I had waited months to hear. It was the question that stripped away the country club memberships, the luxury cars, and the pretense of being a good family. It left them naked in the cold light of the law. My mother burst into tears. It wasn't the pretty, delicate crying she did at parties. It was the ugly, heaving sobbing of a woman who realizes the walls are coming down. We just wanted to help our daughter. She wailed. We didn't mean any harm. We were going to pay it back. My father said nothing. He sat slumped in his chair. A man who had spent his life inflating a balloon and had just watched it pop. The judge turned to Mr. Vance. Counsel Mr. Vance buttoned his jacket. He looked at the floor. Your Honor, in light of this new evidence, which was unknown to me until this moment, I must request a recess to discuss with my clients. No recess, the judge said. I am dismissing this case with prejudice, the judge declared. That means you cannot refile it. Ever. He looked at my parents. Furthermore, I am ordering the immediate removal of the list pendants on Ms. Reyes's property. And given the egregious nature of the evidence presented in Exhibits B and C, specifically the forgery and the misuse of trust funds, I am referring this entire file to the District Attorney's Office and the Securities and Exchange Commission for further investigation. My father's head snapped up. Your Honor, please, he stammered. It was just a misunderstanding. Silence. The judge commanded. You use this court as a weapon to extort your daughter and cover up a crime. You will pay the defendant's legal fees in full. He banged his gavel. Case dismissed. The sound rang in my ears. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. I did not look at my parents. I did not look at Delaney, who was frantically texting on her phone, likely trying to warn her own lawyer that the dam had broken. I stood up. Miles closed his briefcase. Good work. Quinn, he said quietly. We walked down the center aisle. I could hear my mother pleading with Mr. Vance behind me, her voice rising in hysteria. I could hear my father trying to explain, trying to spin a new narrative, but there was no one left to listen. I walked out of the courtroom doors and into the marble hallway. The air felt lighter here. The aftermath happened quickly, the way a building collapses after the demolition charges are blown. Within 48 hours, the story broke. Not the story they wanted, the ungrateful daughter story, but the real story. The local mainline newspaper picked up the court filing. Local socialites accused of trust fund fraud and forgery. The shame they had tried to weaponize against me came back to boomerang them. My parents were forced to list the house in Bryn Mawr. It was sold in a distress sale to cover the restitution to the trust fund and my legal fees. The Range Rover was repossessed. The country club memberships were revoked. They moved into a 2-bedroom rental in a neighboring town, far away from the society they had desperate tried to impress. Delaney fared no better. With the evidence of the suppression payments now public record in my lawsuit, her husband's lawyers had a field day. She lost everything in the divorce. No alimony, no settlement. She was lucky to avoid jail time, only because she turned state's witness against the person who had given her the inside tip. They were all still alive. They were free, but they were stripped of the one thing they valued more than family, their image. A week later, I sat in my apartment in Rittenhouse Square. It was 7:15 in the evening. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the city. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the ledger, the massive spreadsheet I had built to track their lies, their debts, and their crimes. I looked at the columns: debt repaid, lies exposed, freedom acquired. I didn't need the file anymore. I didn't need to track them. They were no longer a risk I had to manage. They were just people I used to know. I moved the cursor to the delete button. I didn't do it with anger. I didn't do it with sadness. I did it with the clinical satisfaction of closing a completed project. I clicked. The file vanished. I stood up and walked to the window. I pressed my hand against the cool glass. My fortress was still standing. The walls I had built with my own money, my own discipline, and my own silence were stronger than ever. For the first time in 34 years, I took a breath that didn't catch in my throat. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring with a demand. I was alone, and it was the most beautiful feeling in the world. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving, cooking, or maybe relaxing in your own fortress? Please let me know in the comments below. I love reading your stories. If you enjoyed watching Justice Be Served, please subscribe to the Maya Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach even more people. Until next time, stay safe and keep your passwords secure.